Hello and welcome to our webinar today entitled Nutrition for Performance with McGill dietetic intern Meagan Mamchur. Meagan will be explaining the basics of nutrition for performance, which involves strategies for fueling and recovery after your training and general nutrition habits that have been shown to promote health and performance. Meagan will be preparing a peanut power bowl recipe. Thanks, Meagan, for preparing this session for us, and we look forward to learning from you today.
All right, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And like Taya just mentioned, today our webinar is going to be all about nutrition and quick meals for performance. So our game plan for today is we're going to go over some nutrition basics before we kind of dive into some more specific nutrition strategies for performance. We're going to do a little cooking demo with our recipe today, which is peanut power bowls, and then we'll do a little discussion about meal prepping. So to just start off with a statement, a nutritionally adequate diet is the foundation for improving performance. And it's already well established that good nutrition is linked to good health in general. And for athletes specifically, a diet that has all of the energy and the nutrients that we need is really necessary to meet the demands of training and performing and recovering well. And we should also note that diet isn't just important on the day of a competition or an important training session, but maintaining our balanced diet in the days and weeks and even months leading up to a competition will help ensure that we can perform at our best. So first, just to bring your attention to this pyramid, this is the athlete's food pyramid. And really what the pyramid emphasizes is whether you're an elite athlete or you're just playing recreational sports, it's super important to focus on the basics of nutrition before getting into sport specifics. So here on the first two tiers, the bottom of our pyramid, these ones are really comprised of the components of a healthy diet. So eating a variety of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, meats, etc., to get the energy and the nutrients that we need. And it also incorporates some healthy eating behaviors and habits that we will talk about in just a little bit. The middle of our pyramid, this section includes strategies that are more sport specific, like timing of nutrients around exercise to enhance our performance. And then the top of our pyramid here, which is the smallest section, which should really make up the smallest part of our diet, is sports supplements and sport-specific products. And these products can offer a competitive advantage to athletes that generally have these, the bottom of the pyramid already achieved. But unfortunately, it's been found that many people are kind of using the pyramid in the opposite direction and using these supplements to make up for components of their diet that they're lacking. And we'll talk a little bit more about supplements in a little bit too. So if we start at the bottom of our pyramid with the components of a basic healthy diet, we have 6 essential nutrients. And these nutrients are essential because we either don't make enough of them or we don't make them at all. And therefore we have to eat them in our diet. So if we start with our macronutrients, and these macronutrients are needed in larger or macro amounts, and they include our carbs, protein, and fat. Carbs, they're a key source of fuel for our bodies, especially for athletes, and we can find them in a wide variety of foods, like our grain products, breads, fruits and vegetables, beans, and many other foods as well. We have protein, which a major role is in building and repairing our different body tissues and our muscles. And we can find them in both animal sources, such as meat or dairy, as well as plant sources like nuts, seeds, beans, and some amounts in vegetables as well. And then we have our fats, which have many different roles, primarily our form of energy storage, but it also helps with absorbing and storing vitamins and minerals. It acts as insulation for our bodies and protects our internal organs. And again, we can find fat in many different sources like meat or fatty fish, nuts, and some produce like avocados. We move on to our micronutrients. So these are nutrients that are needed in smaller or micro amounts, and they include our vitamins and minerals. And our vitamins, both of our vitamins and minerals, are really key overall for supporting the health of our different body functions, for the health of our bones and muscles, our nervous system, pretty much everything. And in general, if we have an adequate and a varied diet, we generally get all of the vitamins and minerals that we need. And our last essential nutrient is water, which is especially crucial as 62% of our body is made of water. And water plays many different roles in the body, from transporting nutrients to tissues, getting rid of waste in our body, and regulating our core temperature. And our water intake, it doesn't necessarily just come from the water that we drink, but also the other beverages, coffee and tea, smoothies, juice, as well as produce that has a higher content of water, like watermelon, peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, etc. So Canada's Food Guide is also a really helpful tool for talking about the basics of healthy eating for the general population. And what's different with the new version that we have, instead of talking about portions of food, now we're talking more about proportions and proportions of a plate. So we see here that we have about a half a plate of fruits and vegetables. It's suggested to have about a quarter of a plate of protein food, and choosing plant proteins as often as we can as well. And the last quarter being grains, and choosing whole grains as much as possible as well. And also to make water our drink of choice. Canada's Food Guide also gives us some suggestions for healthy eating behaviors and habits, like cooking often in order to limit the amount and the frequency which we consume processed foods, and to try and choose products that are lower in sodium, added sugar, and saturated fat. And one way to do this, to choose products that are lower in these components, is to use food labels, such as our example here. And we have two examples. If we look at our serving size, we can see that we're comparing two products that have the same serving size, so it's going to be easy for us to compare the nutrition in them. And then next we can take a look at our calories. So we can see that product B, for the same amount of food, it's giving us more energy than product A. And then next we can look at our percent daily value. And the percent daily value really just tells us, in this portion of food, how much of a nutrient, or what percent of our daily need of a nutrient is this portion giving us. And we can use these guidelines to kind of help us interpret these numbers. So if something has 5% or less, we can consider it a little. And if the portion has 15% or more of a nutrient, we can consider it a lot. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing kind of depends on what nutrient it is. So for example, if we look at saturated fat, in product A, we can see it has 0%, which is obviously a little, compared to product B with 15%. So that would be considered a lot. So if saturated fat is something that we are trying to decrease, and we have these two products and we're comparing on labels, product A might be a better choice for us. Finally, we can look at our list of ingredients, and they have the ingredients listed in decreasing order by weight. So in this product, we can see by weight, it is mostly sugar, then flour, oil, etc. So we can use this to really see what the product is mostly made of and make a good choice according to that. And the last thing that I'll mention about Canada's Food Guide is they remind us to eat mindfully, limit our distractions when we're eating, so we can recognize when we're still hungry and when we're actually full. And of course, to make eating an enjoyable experience, and to eat and cook with others whenever possible. So for athletes specifically, there are a few key nutrients to keep in mind and to make sure that your diet contains. And we can start with iron, which has a key role in transporting oxygen to our tissues, like our muscles, in order to help them function properly, which of course is important for athletes. And we can find iron in animal sources like meat or liver. As well, we can find it in plant sources as well. But in plant sources, it's a little bit harder for our body to absorb the iron. So to combat that, we can combine plant sources of iron with sources of vitamin C, which helps it be absorbed easier. So things like oranges, peppers. So for example, maybe you have a spinach salad and you add oranges to make the iron easier to absorb from the spinach. Next, we have calcium, which is important for maintaining the health of bones, our muscles, and our nerves. And we can find calcium in dairy products. We can find it in green leafy vegetables, fish like salmon or sardines, where you eat the bones as well. And it's also added to foods like orange juice or cereal. And then finally, we have vitamin D, which also plays a role in the health of our bones, and it also helps absorb calcium. Some people might be at a bit of a higher deficiency or at a higher risk of deficiency in vitamin D, including us in Canada, just because the sun has a role in forming vitamin D in our skin. And, in the winter when it's dark and we don't spend as much time outside, we get less vitamin D formation by the sun. So it's important that we focus on food sources, and those include salmon, egg yolks, mushrooms, and again, it's added to foods like juice and milk. So throughout my presentation, I have a couple of poll questions, and you can access the online form at this link, and you can check what the right answer is here. And I have two for us right now, just to kind of summarize what we just went over. And the first one is the main role of protein is to either A, provide energy, B, protect our internal organs, or C, build and repair our muscles and body tissues. And number two is which of the following foods is not a good source of carbs? Whole grain pasta, sweet potato, eggs, or quinoa. All right, so if we move now onto our second tier of our sports nutrition pyramid, which is the sport nutrition specific strategies. The goal of these strategies is to optimize performance, and we can do this by addressing factors that can hurt our performance. Secondly, to achieve gut comfort and avoid hunger or upset, which can either reduce our enjoyment or our performance during a training or an event. And finally, to provide nutrition support for overall health and adaptation to exercise so that you can maintain your level of training and performance over time. All right, so as I just mentioned, in order to optimize our performance through nutrition strategies, we need to address factors that can impair our performance. And this can include dehydration or electrolyte imbalance, could be GI discomfort or glycogen depletion. And these factors can impair performance through causing fatigue or deterioration in some kind of output like power or strength or concentration. So before we talk a little bit more about some specific strategies, let's kind of discuss first what exactly glycogen is. So glycogen is our storage form of carbohydrates, and it is limited in amount. So when we consume food containing carbs like fruit or starch, it's broken down into glucose and it travels in our blood, and it's either it's stored somewhat in our muscles and also somewhat in our liver. It can be used right away as fuel, and if there's an excess, it will be stored as fat. So during sport or exercise, we do use both fat and carbs for energy, but as the intensity of our exercise increases, we rely more on carbs for fuel. But again, as I just mentioned, we only have a limited storage of carbs as glycogen. And when we don't have enough glycogen in our muscles and our liver, we can experience fatigue. We might have a harder time sustaining high intensity exercise, and we might have a hard time concentrating. Therefore, our nutrition strategies are really to focus on optimizing our stores, making sure they're full of glycogen, and making sure we have as much carbohydrate as possible available for fuel during our exercise. So now let's take a look at a couple of guidelines and steps that we can take before exercising to properly fuel up. So first, we can talk about hydration, which is important both for general health and for exercise performance. As we go about our daily lives, we lose water when we breathe and when we sweat, and especially for athletes who are sweating extra during exercise. And so we have to replace the fluid that we were losing. So our goal before we start exercise even is to make sure that we are adequately hydrated. And in general, this range of fluid here is generally enough. It's about a water bottle or a shaker cup full of fluid. But of course, the specific amount of fluid that each individual needs is going to depend on many different things. But in general, we can tell from just the color of our urine if we're hydrated enough. So we're going to aim for, a lighter, paler color and avoiding the darker yellows. And now we also have to consider timing. And we say about 2 to 4 hours before, because we want to give our bodies a chance to get rid of excess fluid so that we're not carrying it around with us when we exercise. That could be uncomfortable if there's too much. And now to talk about carbs. So before exercise, like I mentioned, we want to promote our carb availability and build up our glycogen stores so that we have fuel. So our focus is on having meals and snacks with good quality carbohydrates. And we can, in 1 to 4 hours, when you're a little bit farther away from your exercise, you might want to consider having a larger meal that has a good amount of carbs, maybe something like rice, including a protein and some vegetables maybe. But as you get closer to exercise, you might want to consider having something that's mostly carbohydrates, as our fat, our protein, and fiber can take longer to digest. And so if you have a full stomach when you're exercising, it can get a little bit uncomfortable. So having just a quick snack that's mostly carbs, it'll digest quickly, it'll be comfortable, and you'll have a little boost of energy before you start your exercise. And the composition of our meals, this meal here also can depend a little bit on how intensely you're training that day. So we have here the athlete's plates. And these are similar to the Canada's Food Guide plate that we saw earlier. In fact, this one, the Easy Training Day, is pretty much the same. We have, the half plate of fruits and vegetables, a quarter of grains and proteins each. But for athletes, of course, carbs are important for fuel. So on a moderate training day, when we have maybe 2 workouts, when that's a little bit harder and when that's maybe more technical, we've increased the carbs a little bit. The greens a little bit, taken out a little bit of vegetables, adding some more fruit. And then, of course, on our hard training day, we have a half a plate of greens with some added fruit as well. So while the Canada's Food Guide plates are kind of good for the general population, these ones are a bit more specific to the needs of athletes. All right, so now during exercise, for hydration, we want to replace the sweat that we lose in order to maintain our hydration status. So similar range, about a water bottle per hour is generally enough for the average person, because of course, how much you sweat depends on many different things, like how intensely you're training, how long, how fit you are, how hot it is. So that's a good general guideline. And for carbohydrates, the purpose of having carbs during exercise is to provide like an external source of fuel, maybe spare our glycogen stores a little bit. But for exercise that's shorter than an hour, typically we don't really need any extra carbs. But for exercise that lasts longer than an hour, about 30 to 60 grams can be recommended. And these targets can be met either through food, just regular food, or something like Gatorade that has carbs in it. But you have to consider the nature of your sport and what you're doing and how many opportunities you have to actually, if you can actually eat a snack, or maybe you don't have that opportunity, so you opt for something like Gatorade because it's more convenient for you. All right, so now that we've kind of gone over the basic recommendations, we can try and apply it to a real life situation. So here we have Sam, who is a long distance runner. And today he has a run. His workout is a run, 45 minutes, moderate to high intensity for him, planned at 3 o'clock. And it's currently 10. And he wants to figure out what to eat and when he should eat in order to be properly fueled for his run. So to remind us of our recommendations for before exercise, we're focusing on good quality carbs and our fluid. So this kind of workout this day for Sam, we're considering it a moderate intensity training day. So we can use our moderate training athlete's plate kind of as a guideline. So now what should Sam eat? So he wants to have a sandwich and a banana and milk. And is this a good choice? So if we look at our plate, we have 2 slices of bread that goes in our greens. We have some vegetables, some lettuce and tomato and onion in here. And we have a smaller portion of protein and maybe some cheese in there as well. We have our banana on the side, and our milk gives us some fluid as well as some protein and carbs as well. So generally this would be for Sam a good choice. And in terms of timing, he decides to have his lunch at 12, so he gives it a chance to digest before he goes for a run. However, at 2 o'clock, an hour before his run, he's kind of hungry again and he wants to have a snack. So again, like I said, we kind of want to limit higher protein and higher fiber and fat when we get closer in order to make sure it digests properly. So having a snack that's mostly carbohydrates, like some yogurt and some fruit, could be a good option. And also during this time, he's going to have fluid. So we got some from our milk. And if he has another glass of water, he should be good to go. So during exercise, we aren't going to have any extra carbs because we are exercising for less than an hour. And our recommendation for fluid here is also for an hour. And since we're only going for 45 minutes, it's a little bit lower than this. But in general, he's going to take his little water bottle because it's going to be not too much fluid that it's uncomfortable for him to drink, and as well as convenient for him to carry on his running belt. So during his run, he felt energized and comfortable. And I hope that gave you kind of a good idea of how to apply the recommendations to your schedule and to your needs. All right, so to touch briefly on our last level of our sport nutrition pyramid, which was our supplements and our sports products, the Canadian Centre for Ethics in Sports did this report and found that 87% of athletes were saying that they use supplements. And most of them were getting their advice from friends and family instead of a doctor or a dietitian. And they reported many different reasons for wanting to use supplements, like enhancing their performance or their health, giving them more energy, making up for a poor diet, like I mentioned before, supporting their immune system, and changing their body composition. The problem with the supplements is that there's really a lack of regulation for both manufacturers and marketers. So we need to be aware of how the products are being marketed, especially to athletes. A lot of them have claims for these benefits, but a lot of the time there just isn't strong scientific evidence to support that. So if we are wanting to consider using a supplement, hopefully you do so with the help of a health professional, like a doctor or a registered dietitian. But we should consider its efficacy. Is it effective? Is it useful for the purpose that we want to use it? How potent is it, or what is the dose that we should be taking? Is it safe? And especially for athletes, does the use of the product comply with the anti-doping codes of your sport? So overall, the decision to use supplements is really personal and individual, but ideally it's used on top of an already balanced diet, like I mentioned with the athlete's pyramid. And we have to consider the potential benefits with the possible risks as well, whether it's just the risk that you might spend money on something that isn't going to give you any advantage, or it could be a risk that it harms your health. We just have to be careful. Okay, so I have one more poll question before we move on to our cooking demo. And this one is, during which activity might a sports drink like Gatorade be beneficial? 30-minute cycle class, half marathon, or a 45-minute resistance training session. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears, and we are going to be making, or I'm going to be making, our recipe for today, which is peanut power bowls. And they're full of flavor and nutrients, and they're easy to make, and they're also super customizable, as you will see. So for our ingredients, we're using brown rice as our base with some fruits and veggies on top. Our dressing is made up of some things that hopefully you already have in your pantry, but I'll mention some subs as we go through. Equipment is pretty basic. You can either use a microwave or a stove, and we're going to be using a blender today too. So if you have allergies, the peanut butter can be swapped with any other kind of nut or seed butter. Soy allergies, the soy sauce can be replaced by coconut aminos, and the edamame can be replaced by any other kind of protein or bean that you like. And gluten allergies, soy sauce, there are a couple of other substitutions as well. Just a quick note about blender safety. Don't put your fingers in the blender. And if you want to put a utensil in, just unplug it before you do so. Only blend for a short period of time, especially with the smaller bullet blenders that don't have as much power. Take it off the base before you take the lid off, or else you might end up with a bit of a mess. Be careful with hot liquids. If you want to blend something hot, just let it cool for a couple minutes and let it open a little bit so that the steam can vent out. And for hard or frozen foods, just make sure you have enough liquid so that you don't damage your blender. All right, so here's the video. And here we go. We're going to start by making our dressing. So I'm using a bullet blender, but you can use a normal blender, a food processor, or even one of those immersion blenders. And we're going to start by adding all of our dressing ingredients. So we have the ginger and the garlic. We have soy sauce. We've got rice vinegar. I'm using a chili garlic sauce, which you could use any kind of hot sauce that you want, like sriracha or even just chili flakes. And of course, you can make it as spicy as you like. I would say that the recipe is pretty mild as it's written. So then we had brown sugar, and we have peanut butter or substitute if you're using a substitute. And we're just going to add a little bit of water as well to help it blend. And we're going to blend about 30 seconds or until it's smooth. And you can pour it right into a resealable container. The dressing makes 4 servings, so you're going to have some leftovers. And next we are going to cut up all our veggies that are going to go on top of our bowl. So we have red pepper or whatever color pepper you have. And we are going to do some carrot and some cabbage as well. And I'm using my vegetable peeler to get just really nice little thin shavings. But of course, you can just use your knife to cut it as you like. And we are going to set aside all of our veggies so that they are ready to go for assembly. And to assemble our bowls, we're going to use a base of brown rice. And I just cooked it according to the package directions. You can use the stove or the microwave for most brands. And we're going to add on our veggies, put all the colors on there. And then our protein source today is edamame. And I bought my edamame frozen. And typically you can just either mic it or boil it with a little bit of water and drain it before you want to use it. And then we have mango. Again, fresh frozen is fine. If it's frozen, just let it defrost a little bit. And then we have our peanut dressing that we made earlier. 1 serving is about 3 tablespoons. And the dressing makes about 4. And there we go. You can add sesame seeds or chopped peanuts or green onions or whatever you want on top. And that is our peanut power bowl. All right, so if we take a look at some of the nutrition facts of our peanut power bowl, we kind of read it like we were practicing earlier, our nutrition facts table. A serving is a bowl and 3 tablespoons of dressing. It gives us about 640 calories. And if we look at some of the nutrients that we discussed that were important for athletes, we have our carbs, and here we have 37%, which is a good source. We have a good amount of fiber and protein as well. So maybe this is a meal that we would want to have earlier in the day, not super close to exercise. But of course, we can also easily customize the components of the meal to our training. You can easily just add more or less rice, more or less vegetables to make it meet your needs for that day. And the bowls are also super versatile and customizable to your preferences, to what your budget is, what you already have in your fridge. You can use this formula here to really just have fun with it and make it meet your needs. So you can start with a good quality carbohydrate as the base, add a lean protein, whether it's an animal protein or a plant protein, doesn't matter. Add some fruits and vegetables, get all the good colors in there for all the nutrients and the antioxidants. And then add some sauce and maybe a couple fun toppings like nuts or seeds or dried fruit. And just to give you some inspiration, maybe you want to make a Grape Bowl. You can do a base of quinoa. You can add some chicken or chickpeas with some spices on it. Add some veggies that you might find in a Greek salad like cucumber, tomato, red onion, or lettuce. And then you can add either tzatziki or olives or maybe even a Greek dressing on top. Another option could be like a fall harvest bowl with a base of roasted sweet potatoes, maybe some herb chicken, roasted veggies like Brussels sprouts or carrots or some chopped apple as well, and maybe something fun like walnuts and a balsamic dressing. So really, there's just some ideas to help you get creative and, have fun with it. All right, so now just to talk a little bit about meal prepping. I know being a student in general is time consuming, but being an athlete and having all these other time commitments can be stressful. So thinking about what to eat and what you're going to cook every single day can be overwhelming. And meal prepping might be a helpful solution for you. So some benefits of meal prepping. First of all, it ensures that you have a healthy meal ready to go when you want it. You save money on not buying takeout, not wasting groceries that you didn't end up using. Although it might take a little bit of time to prepare and plan 1 or 2 days a week, really save time every single day, not having to cook. And of course, you're not stressed thinking about what to eat and cook every single day, especially if you have specific goals to meet. So, if you're interested in doing meal prepping, but it seems a little bit daunting, there are a couple tips. If you just start small, maybe you start with one meal like breakfast or lunch, you can gradually build up to do as much prepping as you want. And you don't even have to necessarily do a separate meal prep, but if you one day for dinner just make extra and you can just have leftovers for lunch for the rest of the week. And another thing that you could do is instead of prepping a whole meal, you could just prep different components of the meal, especially if you don't like the idea of eating the same thing every single day. Maybe you just make a batch of a grain that you like and a batch of protein and chop up some veggies so that they're kind of like semi-prepped so you can throw them together into different types of meals. But of course, with meal prepping, there comes a few food safety tips. Generally, our leftovers are good for about 3 to 4 days at a time. So we might not be able to prep for, say, a whole entire week at one time. We might need to do 2 separate days if we do want a whole week prepared. We also need to keep food out of the danger zone, which is this range of temperature from 4 to 60. Where bacteria grows and multiplies quickly, and that includes room temperature as well. So we want to avoid keeping food out for longer than 2 hours. And that includes when we're transporting food, like if we're taking lunch to work or to school. Ideally, we would have a refrigerator to put it into, but if that's not possible, having a cooler lunch bag with some ice packs will keep the food cold and safe. Also, you can take advantage of your freezer because the freezer, while it doesn't kill bacteria, it just prolongs the time that it's good for until we can. So it lets us keep it longer and use it later. And while these are some good general recommendations, you should also know some signs of spoilage to watch out for. And that's typically any kind of change in color, texture, or smell. It might indicate spoilage. And unfortunately, if you're ever in doubt, it's best sometimes to throw it out just because getting sick from food is usually not worth it. And my last slide touches on the last benefit of our recipe, and that it's cost effective. So a similar type of bowl that you would find at Freshie starts at $8.50, while a serving of our recipe today was only $2.20. So eating out, this could cost up to 4 times as much as our homemade recipe. So just to recap, our power bowls, they're delicious and they're nutritious, they're budget friendly and time friendly, especially if you meal prep them, and super customizable both to your preferences and to your needs. So my last 2 poll questions, true or false, it's only important to eat well on the day that you want to perform well. And then finally, which is not a benefit of meal prepping? Saving money, less stressing, having a whole week of meals ready, or the fact that you don't need a lot of time or equipment. And again, here is the link if you need it for the poll questions. And that is it for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Meagan. Please join us for other webinars in the future and view our Perform webinar page for previous Perform content. So this concludes our session today. Take care and stay safe.